Welcome, everybody, and thank you for coming to today's webinar. We're pleased to be able to welcome Matt Kennell, who's Executive Director of Sales for Versa Press. He's actually part of the fourth generation of ownership of Versa Press. It's been in his family for quite some time. Matt is a member of the BISG board. He's finishing his third year, and he's been nominated to serve as our chair starting in July. A vote that will be taken at the annual meeting of members on April 25th. Matt's here to talk today about the value and the power of standardization in production planning. And he's given this topic a lot of thought, not just in advance of this presentation, but really in how VersaPress works. So he'll be sharing some real world examples. Matt, thank you very much for making the time today, and welcome to the webinar.
Yeah, so welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. So as we get started today, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of an overview. So the changes in our supply chain in North America have, I think, made standardization more of a value proposition today than it may have been in years past. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I see standardization as being one thing that can help our industry be more successful long term. So I'm also going to share with you, we're going to kind of go through in order. We're going to talk about the benefits to the paper and material providers, and then move on to how standardization helps manufacturers and some of the benefits for publishers as well. So I want to first start by giving a special thank you to Bill Rojak, which I don't know if he's joined the call or not, but for giving me permission to share some slides with you that Matt Baer, who I see, and him and I presented last November at ECPA. So I want to give a shout out to him. But anyways, the North American market, we can kind of see with this graphic, this is Billerud. So the consolidation, if you look at it from a timeline perspective, starts kind of late 90s and really picks up momentum as we move into the 2000s. And on this next chart, more on the uncoated side, we see another example of this. So Domtar, I'll give you guys kind of a minute to kind of look at this. But really, it's the roll up of the 2019, the 2021, and the 2023 that I think has had a dramatic impact on our industry, and is one of the reasons why I think standardization has more value to us as an industry today. The next slide is kind of a reflection of the consolidation and the acquisitions that we've seen play out in our industry over the past decade or two. So if you just look at coated free sheet, for example, as of, I think this was 2023, end of 2023 data. So we went from 80 paper machines in North America down to 11. And that's a big swing. And I'll share a little bit later on this. And this next slide here is uncoated free sheet capacity. And it's going from 250 down to today being around 60-ish paper machines. Well, even here, the difference that I feel like the difference between uncoated and coated, we're already feeling as an industry today. So with 11 paper machines, the availability of different variations of coated stocks has shrunk. So if I look at all the possible uncoated papers that are being printed on in books today, there's a lot of customization, opaques and, 80 bright, 84 bright, 88 bright, 92 bright. Whereas in the coated space, being already down to, I guess further along this process of consolidation, it's like I think 45-pound mat, was stopped being produced in sheeter rolls, 60, 70, 80, 100-pound mat. There's just been a shrinking of how many of those that mills are offering to the market compared to uncoated free sheet. So I think, what I took away from this slide is that there's an opportunity maybe before this trend continues over time for us in the coming years to work on trying to, as an industry, figure out what are those sheets that we really want to have around and be in our books long term. So yeah, talking about manufacturing, this is the last Midland slide, but yeah, a very similar story. And again, just kind of more backdrop to where this presentation is coming from. So these are some of the roll-ups that CJK, Lakeside, and Berryville have done, and it's led to less printing plants in North America that are producing books today. So I wanted to give you guys a lot of real world examples today. So what I'm showing on this slide is how paper variability impacts your book manufacturers. So this is, I couldn't fit the whole sheet on it, but this is probably 75% of the different variations of somewhere like around 18 to 20 different text stocks and anywhere between 1 and 7 different roll sizes that are carried on the floor to service the book of business that VersaPress is producing books for. So the columns are actually weeks. So this is back in November. What you're seeing in those columns are how many trucks are coming in for that roll size and that grade of paper on any given week. And I cut off kind of the proprietary stuff, but on the far right side, that calculation there is basically a formula that VersaPress is using and has refined over the years that helps us not have an excess amount of inventory more often than not. But you're always in a offset print environment, having to forecast out further, whereas in a POD environment, I would say whether it's the technology revolution there and digital printing has been tremendous. So my comment about there's just less lanes in digital printing in terms of how many options are available on a digital press versus an offset press is really the point. So kudos to the digital print providers for helping us be more standardized. So yeah, some of the manufacturing variables, to be honest, if I were to share all the manufacturing variables, we wouldn't get done with that presentation today. So I just listed out, basically, the different types of printing, and then within, soft cover binding, you could have lay flat, auto bind, you could have, PUR perfect bound, PUR with French flaps, round corner books. Within hardcover books, they for example, you'll have umpteenth different foil colors. You have head and foot bands. Some people do no head and foot bands. Some people are more standardized on their colors, and others are all over the place. So I showed just a picture of a sheeter there in one of our presses. I like this photo a lot because I feel like this was taken, I think, 3 days ago. So I'm wondering if we can work on the yellow and gold. But this is basically a reflection of the variation of colors that are being ordered today. And then board thicknesses, I think, is the layup in terms of something that do we need 8.0, 8.5, 8.8, 9.8 boards and 120 boards? Or, would 8.0, 8.8, 120 suffice? At VersaPress with ribbons, we've just, standardized it on a 1/4 inch ribbon. Is what we offer. So, yeah, one of the things on the manufacturing side to really highlight is that the spec choices that any one publisher makes is really impacting everyone else's costs. And I'll get into that here in this next section. So shifting over to the benefits for publishers, we're going to start there. We're going to try to tie together all the supply chain segments and then finish up with some opportunities. So as I was saying, yeah, so why do the specifications of the books I choose matter? Well, from my point of view, it's the simple way of looking at it is that the specs of our books either increase or decrease the amount of capacity available in North America. We can choose specs that make a greater utilization of those paper machines and those presses and binders, or we can make more variables, and that when you have more variables in a printing plant, you have less books coming out the door is the bottom line. So I said, what's good for the goose may not be good for the gander. Yeah, so in the manufacturing space, between the manufacturing segment and the publishing segment, the two main cost centers other than materials is really in the press room and the binding department. I will share something with you. I should have looked this ahead of time. But for example, on hardcovers, over the course of 3 days, I'm seeing about a 12,000 unit swing in output. Perfect binding a little closer, so plus or minus 25,000, 30,000 units a day on that report. So I highlight that just to say that, as a manufacturer, we see a clear connection between the types of products that we're producing in a day and their output. So there's a correlation there. So here's another example list of a press list. So this is our P1X, one of our one color offset presses. And if you look down, this is not all one customer. So, manufacturers, should, and VersaPress certainly does, we're putting systems in place and laying a plan out in such a way that we're doing some of this standardization work on our own. So we're, shipping jobs on time, and we have different windows within which we slot your jobs. So, this is not how every press list looks. But I looked at what P1X produced, and it was about, let's see, yeah, it was about 30,000 printed signatures. It was anywhere between 30 and 60,000 printed signatures more than the other 6 one-color presses were producing that day. So again, being a little more uniform can make a difference. And on the publishing side, where I have seen savings, and I continue to think that there are opportunities for publishers to see savings, both on an individual side as well as on an industry level. So I'm positing a 10 to 15% savings opportunity if for a standardization analysis that a publisher took action on as an average. So I just threw some numbers down there just to show you what that would mean in terms of dropping to the bottom line. It's really an inflation hedge. In my opinion, inflation and what happened with paper prices during the pandemic, um, what we've certainly tried to do at VersaPress is automate and create efficiencies to fight back against the cost of the prices going up on the material side. So I'm going to call this Publisher X. This is a real example. And we, on an individual, one publisher, one manufacturer working together. I'm not sure what the savings was on the offshore printing, but the net increase to their profit on the domestic portion of it was $270,000, roughly a 3%, a little under 3% increase in profit the following year after it was implemented. So now going to another example with a publisher, and I'm specifying nonfiction just because I think it, I guess maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know if it matters, but so North American paper mills prices rose during the pandemic on coated, uncoated, that sort of thing. In their case, coated was the stock we were looking at. And so inflation was outpacing the retail price increases on books. That's not a specific problem to them. That's an industry issue that I think every publisher is battling. So the solution for this publisher that we ended up with is on the right-hand side there. So I guess phase one outcome of this analysis was we presented a bunch of options, and the decision was made to move from their flagship product line from an 8x9 to a 7.75x9 trim size. It created a 5.5% reduction in the manufacturing costs of the books. And I'm caveating that it was on we were getting the same number of pages per form. So it's just a slightly more efficient system based on using less paper, smaller roll size. So the savings all from paper costs there. And then about 6 months later, they took another step and went from 7.75x9 to a 7x9. And so that allowed for a much greater reduction in the manufacturing cost that following year of 11%. And it moved, and the reason for that was not only were we using paper more efficiently, we were also using, we were getting 8 more pages per plate, 8 more pages per, press sheet or folded signature. And the run quantity that you're running to on each form was lower. And then another benefit to the cost is that we had fewer pockets used on the gathering line for the same page counts of their books. And then I don't know what the savings was beyond that, but I just noted that they eventually, instead of I guess thinking that they needed to keep 80-pound mat around for some of their books because it was more of what they thought would be a high selling book, had more promise. They were looking at that bulk difference, which is a valid, thing, especially at larger page counts. But I think the range in page counts we're talking about here would be 160 to 256. So this difference in bulk wasn't that great, and they made that change, and it did not impact their sales. So some concluding thoughts. I guess I think that we all as an industry need to look at whether we can what are the things that we can potentially work on. And really, the backdrop that I tried to lay out of, there's just less North American paper and manufacturing capacity. And I think standardization can help there. And I want to also say this, that I feel like at times standardization has been used as something that if you don't standardize, then all the mills are going to close, or it's going to. So I don't look at standardization as something that is a necessity. I look at it really as an opportunity. And I think both BISG and other industry associations can help in this area. It certainly can help offset the negative impacts of declining capital investment. So getting more utilization out of the paper machines as well as the presses and binders that are on the shop floor today. And before I finish, I want to say that I also think that standardization does not mean that the book becomes a more commercial and less creative product. That's maybe another topic that for another day, but I believe that there's ways that we can still have creativity. So at least I would hope that standardization initiatives would not be removing that creative element that makes publishing special and unique and what it is today. So with that, I'm done and appreciate you attending and happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thank you, Matt. I'm going to leave my video off because I still haven't figured out how to make it work. That last comment you made about balancing creative flexibility and standardization, I think is pretty key because that's the thing that we hear from editors. So what approaches have you seen or used to talk about that balance or to demonstrate that it's not inhibition of creativity?
That's a great question. I appreciate it because I feel like the solution to that has been not is bringing the designers and editors into the room and into the conversation. I think sometimes production, they are the front lines workers taking care and making sure the schedules are on time and books are being manufactured to spec and all that. But I've seen a lot more success of communication where information's not being lost in translation. But when we have those more collaborative meetings with publishers, with their other departments included, we've seen a lot of success with that.
So how do you balance the need to reformat existing titles with the benefits from standardization?
Well, one thing is that in that example I gave with the trim size changes, is that it's not this, I guess the standard is it. Can you ask your question again, Ken? I'm sorry, I got off my thought there.
Yeah. So the question is in many cases, well, at least I've run across this where we calculated some pretty big benefits from standardizing trim sizes, but then it turned out that we were going to have to incur a composition fee to reformat the books again.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I got it. So yeah, well, for starters, I would say work on standardization now and implement it now because all those titles are going to convert over to backlist sales. And what I was going to say about that real publisher example is that I could go in and measure today, how much less variation that we have as a result of starting now. But the cost side of it, one thing, for example, like on the spine size changes. So when that example again, when we were transitioning 80-pound mat titles over to 70-pound mat titles for the tech stock, we as the printer changed the spine dimension for the publisher in a lot of cases. And so there's not making, if we had, going back to the publisher, making you put labor into, looking at a new template and that sort of thing, isn't really necessary. So that would be one thought, on the trim size, changes. If it's a proportional reduction and change, I think that's one way of doing it that doesn't require recomposition. But yeah, I don't have a great answer. Maybe somebody else does in terms of how you would avoid those costs. But over the long term, if you're printing those books, you're paying more per unit, for a less efficient. So I think it's really all about the long-term mindset.
I remember one time we were able to use photo reduction. And it turned out that nobody could even see the difference. But it enabled us to fit a larger trim into a smaller trim without a whole lot of expense.
Flowing all the work. Yeah. That's neat.
Now, should publishers see a reduction in make-ready cost if we standardize on common trim and papers due to sharing of setups or something like that?
Yeah, in theory, yes, that should be the case. I mean, so I look at, the annual manufacturing costs, and we look at and we see, okay, we were 97% of budget, on, foil stamping or something. So that as things become more standardized, and certainly as within even a manufacturing plant, as technologies become available so that we can do some of that standardization work ourselves, like you saw on the press list I shared, that's lowered those budgetary labor rates that go into our quoting system.
That's pretty neat.
So every year we're at VersaPress, we're updating those just so that we can actually know what's really cost.
So, so I guess the standardized specs should show up in the print scales. So the non-standard would end up being more expensive for make ready and run.
Yeah, so that's the individual publisher piece of it, is that, if you're working on, like an Amplify's case, and you've got a very large volume of purchasing that you're doing, and educational being squeezed into a short period of time, those situations, yes, that would reduce the cost of what a printer would be pricing at, or where their break even would be at. So you're actually you're kind of helping them help you in a sense. But on a macro level, I also think that's where it's like everybody going in 25 or 100 different directions. I think that there's an opportunity. I mean, obviously, I don't think we're ever going to get to having like 5 trim sizes of books. That's not what I'm advocating for. What I'm advocating for is that, that we don't have, 30 different variations of a 5.5, 8.5 book,
Yes.
and knowing how equipment meets up with trim size, there's a lot of commonality to that, even between printers. So a lot of printers are actually using a lot of the same equipment, in terms of binders and Timpsons and presses and that sort of thing.
Nancy asks a kind of a related question. She says, from a production standpoint, she routinely uses 6x9 rather than 5.5 by 8.5. And she observes that different size sheets don't necessarily work for every press. Do you have a recommendation of a basic trim size that's a better fit than another?
So I don't have that on a industry-wide level, but so it's basically what I'm hearing is that whether in that case, whether she's doing a 6x9 or a 5.5, 8.5, are they producing it as a 6x9 and just cutting it out, so it's the same cost?
I
Or
don't know, Nancy, do you want to come off mute and ask more detail?
Yes, thank you. In the not too distant past, we would choose a 5.5, 8.5 trim size. And then we started moving more towards 6x9, which I haven't, occasionally I'll send out specs for quote and maybe say, okay, we're going to do, 5.5, 8.5, 96 pages, or we're going to do 6x9 and, cut it back to what, 84?
okay, yeah,
So, kind of a
yeah. So in that
larger trim
situation,
size, fewer signatures.
yeah. So in that situation, I would say understanding what the printer's signature compositions are at different trim sizes and where those kind of major changes are would be helpful. Because and the other piece of that equation is also by understanding the signature composition, you find where the efficient page counts are. So for example, if they're producing both 6x9s and 5.5, 8.5s on a 32-page signature system, then going to 84 pages on a 5, I guess on the 6x9 is going to be definitely be more expensive than the 5.5,
Right.
8.5 at the 96-page count, because one has actually more pockets on the binder. It's got, you're including a work and turn folder, or introducing a work and turn situation on a web press. And
We typically plan our books around 16-page signatures. So
okay,
if it goes to the printer and they're using a 32-page signature, that's not necessarily something that I would expect.
okay,
know,
yeah,
But we try to stay away from 8-page signatures because I know
yeah.
that will, increase costs.
But even
And
with the 16-page partial, and the example you gave there, I would still say being on an even signature on that close of a signature system is probably going to veer towards actually being the 96 being more efficient. But yeah, in terms of really figuring out those ideals, so like for example at VersaPress, 7x10 and under, we're able to get at least 32 pages up. So that would be a major, we're between trims as you're analyzing trim sizes, but there's probably maybe 12 different major trim size families under which we're producing a bulk of the books. And then there's a lot of custom imposition systems as well. But
using
so
a
it is
32-page signature
yeah.
for, if you would, please tell me the trim size where you
Yeah,
would
for us, it would
break and go with a 16-page rather than a 32.
So 7x10 and under would be the 32. Then anything between 7x10, or I guess anything over a 7-inch width and a 10-inch height is going to put you at least onto a 24-page signature. So basically in between 7x10 and 9x10 is a 24 at Versa. And then anything 9x10 or larger, I guess it'd be really over. If it violates the 10 on the height, that's the one thing that makes it confusing. But like 8.5 by 11 and 9 3/16 by 12 would be additional levels of that 16-page signature system. So anything but under 9x10, 9 width, 10 height, 24, and then 7x10 or under. So both the width and the height can't violate the break. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's excellent. Thank you.
Let me not jump away from the concept, but it occurs to me that you could add another part to your cast off to look at cast off to trim size. And then if you've got scales from Versa or your printer, you could actually optimize your cost and figure out the best trim to run it at.
Yeah, and that's a lot of times like what we'll do in an analysis is we'll even do all the work for the publisher just to that way they have a cheat sheet to use internally for discussion and real numbers to say, okay, if we make this change, it's gonna, lower our, costs by 5.5% or this many cents per unit. Same thing with covers, treatments. We'll a lot of times in meeting with the editors and designers and production people, that's a really good tool to bring to that meeting, is that workup. So that you can make an informed decision, or have a calculator that you can plug and play with.
So
Okay.
should standardization also take advantage of like common conventional and digital specs so that you can move from like high volume conventional to low volume digital?
I think each publisher might have a different answer on that depending on what markets they're in. But ideally, yeah, you would, if the world was perfect for me, we would only offer the same things that digital printers offer in terms of variables, but I don't think that's realistic. And I think that, I think there is value in the creativity that is available. So it's, I guess, depending on the product type, if after a year or two, that's going to be printed digitally or on demand, I would certainly take that into account from the beginning. And at least know what that costs to, if there is a cost to transition it, what it is, so that you can quantify it.
So back to standardized specs and print scales again. Um, do you show, or should a publisher expect a conversation with a printer that demonstrates a cost optimization, or a better cost of using a standardized print size, or does that really happen with the like spoilage and other factors?
We have that conversation happens all the time. So somebody sends in a 7 1/8 by 9 3/4 trim size book. Um, if the sales rep and the CSR and myself are all doing our jobs, we should be showing them as a second option what a 7 by 9 3/4 price would do for them, and that 1/8 of an inch would, is pretty sizable in that example. So we try to look at what specs are coming in through those lenses, so that we can help our customers find those areas of opportunity within their portfolio of products.
And if the publisher does use standard specs, is that does that open up other possibilities like reserving capacity versus naming specific titles?
Yeah, so yep, that would yeah, definitely how there's, you can have reserved capacity because you're a super large publisher at some plants. But now looking at it in that regards, I feel like that's a mutually beneficial opportunity to save the publisher money, as well as be more efficient on the manufacturing side. And so yeah, having lanes that are defined, like for example, like one color, reservation, one color paperback, 6 by 9 and under, could be an example of a capacity that could be slotted in, ahead of time, or, on an ongoing basis. During the pandemic, we did a lot of things where we were creating weekly or semi-monthly slots, either doing it ourselves, making those slots ourselves based on order usage. And then in other cases, it was more structured, where the publisher was really hurting. And obviously there wasn't a lot of capacity. So we went out into the future and we tried to give them at least a certain amount of capacity that they could get, they could do 3 or 4 titles and get them in 4 weeks, or they could do one book of a larger quantity and get it in 4 weeks. Whereas things going in on a individual title by title basis, either have to be pre-scheduled titles individually all the time for publishers, or they're just coming in and going to the back of the line in terms of backlog, wherever that schedule is at that plant for that product.
It sounds like sounds like you've got the opportunity to gang the setups of similar trim sizes and paper that could reduce costs both for the publisher and decrease turnaround for both the publisher and the printer.
Yes. I'm saying yes because the answer is yes, but I also want to caveat it with there's going to be some situations where are going to be more beneficial and others that aren't. So for example, the fact that I don't know if I can't remember if it was 40% or something in my presentation from November, but it was like 40% of the trim sizes being produced from all of our publisher customers were going on a 5.5 by 8.5 trim family.
Oh,
So yeah, there's not so and yeah, so per sheet
yeah,
fed
you already have that
offset.
baked
So
in.
we've already actually built that in as a some of that in, not all of it, but some of that in to our process. But that still doesn't take away from the savings that would come into effect if somebody that, one publisher, on a one-to-one basis, if we're narrowing those variables, then yeah, you're exactly right. There's savings to be had there. But it really needs to be, I think, on it has to be a more holistic approach than just on title by title to really, I think, extract a lot of the value out of it. But yeah, there's definitely savings to be had just within your own company by looking at that.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a transactional nightmare to try to do it on a title by title basis. And it sounds like the most effective way to do it is to look at how what's happened over the course of a year and then reflect it in the new scales as they come out the following year.
And that doesn't mean that that publisher may not have, 10% of their product or whatever percentage of their product off scales that, where they do feel like, that they need that editorial and design freedom to, kind of go crazy with the features on that book. So yeah, I don't think it's you don't have to pick one or the other, but there's some layups to be had for sure.
So, changing the subject a little bit away from pricing, which is always a thrill-inducing conversation. But Edson mentioned that he's aware of standardizing papers and trim sizes, and then you added boards and foil. Are there anything else that you consider in standardization? Inks? Anything else?
No, I wouldn't say inks. I'd say cover treatments would be another area that they could look at. Especially if your printer is ganging their cover production on larger equipment.
Yep. Okay, and the last question I think that I have here so far, so people feel free to either write in some questions or come off mute. Um, are there potentially any ecological impact to increased standardization?
Yeah, we're talking about sustainability.
Yes.
So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, obviously, we'd love to produce, more books in North America as North American book manufacturers, and Matt Bear can chime in on this too. But I think that it's really about, yeah, how can we utilize that capacity? So if we are on a more standardized, if we have a more standardized set of specs, I think you're going to have a sustainability benefit from the fact that you're able to get more units out of North America. So you're shipping less from overseas. You got, more capacity. And the other part of that environmental impact is that, if you are very tightly aligned with standard trim sizes, I would say you're already being much more environmentally friendly than other non-standard sizes because of the amount of paper waste that some of those books require. Sheet fed offset, at least I feel like we've got a lot of kind of custom systems to handle, like, we have an 8x8.5 system, which is not a common size, but there's, 8x8s and some other, trim sizes that the savings on the paper is so great that it's better to run that custom system than put it up on, an 8x10 or some, larger, the next largest size. So, from that, yeah, we're recycling all that paper. But we've really tried to one of the approaches we've had to sustainability is to try to maximize the use of the sheet of paper that we're putting into the book so that we're not got all this waste for different trim sizes.
Yeah, makes total sense. I'm out of questions.
And
Anybody
there was one that from Amy that early on that you might have missed. She was asking Matt whether he was talking about this from the perspective of offset only, or does it also inkjet? Do some of the rules of thumb that you're trying to put in place apply to inkjet production as well?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of the rules, yeah, a good amount of the rules of thumb would apply to digital and but yeah, I think the equipment, I think, yeah, the equipment kind of makes it already a little bit of a tighter window of specs, but yeah, I would say they'd still apply certainly to digital. And if you are kind of off the common beaten path with your books that you're producing on demand, you're probably paying a lot for them already. And so the savings would be worthwhile to pursue as on a digital, from a digital printer perspective and publishing perspective as well.
We've been talking a lot about costs, but one of the things that this was billed as is it increases your resilience as well. Could you talk a little bit about how using standard specs increases your resilience?
Yeah, so I really think, yeah, it increases our resilience, I think, because of the nature of book pricing and a barcode price. It's hard to, you got to run out of inventory before you start selling the higher barcode price books. And everybody has this fear about, going over the cliff to where now it's negatively impacting sales more than it's helping. So I think one way that we can become more resilient as an industry is to utilize the assets at our disposal better than we are today.
Well, I was thinking things like that if you're using a standard sheet, then you can get it from more places. If you're
Yeah.
using standard trim and sheet, then you can swap your printings in and out more easily. So you end up being able to deal with those capacity constraints better.
You're hitting the nail on the head, yeah. And I think also, BISG is doing some of this work. And yeah, if you're coming to the annual meeting, we'll be covering this, but looking at even things like, yeah, can we improve and upgrade the standards within which we work together as printer and publisher and printer publisher paper provider and really across the supply chain. So for example, do we need to have there's a lot of processes, I guess, that I feel like are in place because that's how we've done it in the past. And I think there's an opportunity to be more efficient in the ways that we work together so that some of the more mundane tasks of uploading files or, different things can happen much more smoothly. So I look at it like, the supply chain of Nike or Apple. They've taken advantage of technology as it's come out and have upgraded the way that they do things in a way that wasn't possible before. And so what BISG, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, is really proposing is that there's an opportunity for BISG and other associations and our industry to collaborate on some of these things to make our industry more resilient.
Liz just dropped a link to the annual meeting into the chat. So Matt, thank you for that pitch there. And Liz, thanks for providing the link.
And the one question that didn't get asked was yours. Maybe you're shying away from it now, but what's the division of savings between publisher and printer?
I didn't want to do that.
All right, fair enough.
I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander. In terms of that, I think anything we can do to run more efficiently and help you guys be profitable as publishers and be successful. If you're not successful, we're not successful. So as we expand our plant this year, or make other technological upgrades over coming years, like we have in the past, we're going to pass those along to our customers to the greatest extent possible.
Yeah,
but it does help both of us. I mean, otherwise, at some point, you get to where the pricing doesn't make sense, or you're making it so that it's set. In some cases, I feel like we've consolidated because of and lost capacity for some of these reasons. But
I don't know whether it's the.
Does that help?
It does. I don't know whether it's the inverse, converse, or contrapositive of that, but ZM just mentioned, as more people standardized in the past, did the costs of the non-standard trims and materials go up?
Did they go up in the past compared to how they're going up now?
Yeah, so it's just from experience, as people have standardized more, did the cost of the non-standard trims and materials go up?
I would say that there's been a spread the spread has increased over time as things have become more standardized between a non-standard trim size and a standard trim size. The other thing I would say to that is that also past experience has told me that there's been, times, like in 10, 15 years ago where it was just printers were just, kind of in a situation where they were not necessarily making money. And so standardization also helps manufacturers have, the ability to kind of continue to reinvent themselves and make sure that they're remaining viable as a business longer term. Because if you don't, obviously everybody knows we don't have money to put back into our companies. It's kind of you're starting to head downhill at some point.
That's right. There's such a thing as being too good at purchasing, as many companies have found out. Hey, Ed, thank you so much for the time and the really thoughtful exploration of standardization. This is certainly a topic that is always present in editorial and production conversations. And I think you've provided some other ways to think about it and how we can provide those incentives to our companies to focus on this.
Yeah, and I'd hope that today was, was not meant to be a whole guide to this process, but hopefully just a starting point to, more deep thought and conversations to take place in the future.
I think we need to make sure we do that. Very good. Brian, anything further to add?
No, thank you to Matt, and thank you, Ken, for powering through on your technical challenges to be able to moderate today.
My absolute pleasure. It's always fun to talk about topics like this, and Matt was a good sport with the all the pricing and standards, all the pricing stuff. So thank you again, Matt.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Good seeing everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.